Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity. We're in BIMThoughts land again. You're in BIMThoughts land again. We're all in BIMThoughts land again. We're all thinking BIM, and BIM thinking is good. I'm joined by Dana DeFilippi. Hi, Dana.
Hey, Bill.
Hi, Carl.
Hello, Bill.
We have a special guest today. We have Kristina Williams, used to be Garden Hire, used to be Bolin.
Wow, you got them all right. Hi, everyone.
Hello, hello. Kristina, I think you need to redefine yourself.
You know, I was wondering if you were going to ask me that, and I
So was
didn't
I.
prepare anything, and I was like, I wonder if I would define myself the same way I defined myself in the past.
I don't
And
know.
I
Do you
didn't,
remember
I
how
don't
you define?
remember. I have no idea.
So then the definition changes or is the same and you won't know.
For people that do not know me, just in context, I am the director of design technology at Lionocus. We're around 200 people based in California, and we're architects, structural engineers, interior designers, and yeah,
Yeah,
that's me.
that's great.
Yeah.
So do you define yourself more as Michigan or Hawaii today? Or California?
I would say, you know, I really can't identify with Michigan much anymore. It's been,
Yeah.
even though that's where I'm from originally, it's
Mm-hmm.
been like 12, 13 years, I guess, since I lived there.
Wow,
I
that's
have,
like 2/3 of your life.
right? I still have family there, but I just don't feel like a Michigander. I don't know if you knew that's what a Michigan person's called, a
A
Michigander.
Michigander?
Michigander. I definitely identify with Hawaii a lot. We were before before you got on, Dana and Carl and I were talking about lakes and puppies a lot, and
Oh my.
we just moved onto a lake and there's palm trees, and I feel like I live in Hawaii. And
Oh, well there
so
you go. That's probably why you bought that house.
yes, I wanted
Because
to
of the
feel
palm
like
trees.
I live there again. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm a mix between Hawaii and California identification today.
Hawaii and California. And you still have an 818 cell number.
808, yeah.
808.
Not gonna give that one up.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Those are probably hard to get.
You know, it has gotten me a discount in Hawaii. They have a Kama'aina discount, which is like
Really?
a local discount, and I have been able to get that because of my phone number.
That is wonderful news.
Yes.
That just saved enough money to pay for that phone.
Right.
Right. Oh, so I was sitting here in my home office, minding my own business, and up popped an email from Knowledge Architecture, our friends there, and your picture was on that email.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my goodness, that's somebody I know. And so I thought to myself, I need to watch that video. And I watched it. And I thought to myself, I need to share this with the world of the people who haven't seen this yet. And then I thought, well, why should I just share the video when I can have Kristina come on BIM Thoughts and share it herself?
I'm glad you took away some good things from it.
Oh, well, I don't want to take all the good things away. We need to share.
Yeah. Well, where should we start?
Let's start at the beginning, and when we get to the end, we can stop.
Okay. So the topic of the talk was the power of embedded change agents.
Embedded change
agents.
And they're not secret embedded change agents.
They're not secret. They're very known. So those are key, very important words in all of those. So embedded and change agent, right? And it was all about a program that we have in our design technology studio, where about 8 years ago, we had 4 of us in design technology. And like I said, we have a firm of around 200 people. And we had already rolled out Revit and we were getting started, but we knew that we needed a lot more, like, I guess, boots on the ground out in our studios
Mm-hmm.
that we felt confident they could help their peers with understanding Revit and we could get it going a lot faster. So it really started out from a very simple need of just having better Revit adoption at that time. So we started this program we call Boot Camp, so Design Technology Boot Camp, and it was a training program that we figured would be an annual training program, and we would take representatives from all of our different studios and offices, various markets and disciplines, and put them through intermediate to advanced at first. Oh, I mean, it wasn't at first just Revit. We made it a lot more well-rounded with just anything design technology related, and they would be kind of like our advocates and liaisons out in the studios. That turned into 8 years later, we are still doing that annual training program. And when somebody graduates from the training program, they become a DTSS. It's a mouthful. I meant to rebrand it a long time ago and now it
Yeah.
just stuck and I don't know if I can. So it's Design Technology Support Specialist. Did I already say that? DTSS. It's funny because I'll talk about it later, but we are also like, so what I'm getting at is we have so many DTSS now. We actually have, so we've put 39 people through the program with people with turnover and, not everybody's still here. We have 23 of them remaining, and that's about a quarter of our production staff. And we have so many of them now that we're kind of breaking them out into specialties as well. So now they are our DTSS champions of something like they'll be like a model management champion or
Yes.
so anyways. And so the power of embedded change agents is I had to really think about what what has occurred with these DTSS over the years and how are they change agents? Because it's that kind of thing where something, it's good. You know that there's a lot of benefit coming out of it, but you can't really put your finger on it until you really reflect on what's happening. And there's a lot of different layers to it, but what we found is that training's training, right? We can put anybody through training and it's just courses and we're in there doing some hands-on training and then that's it, right? If it could stop there at just training and we've elevated their skills in some way, hopefully. But because we kind of kept this relationship as them being our liaison after graduation, and we've kind of given them more responsibility and we've empowered them to really start having more of a voice and advocating for things, all things DT, then they've become more of those change agents than we ever really expected. And I kind of broke it out into two areas where I called it the boot camp effect, where, like I said, the boot camp, it could just be training, but what I noticed is happening is we're grabbing people from different markets. The way that we're structured is that, like, if somebody works on education projects, they only work on education projects. That's our organizational structure. And so when we grab a representative from each market and we put them in a room with us and we spend all this time training, and back then when it started it was like 200 hours of training for them
Wow.
that we've pared it down over the years, but it's still we're in a room together for a lot of time, and these people are we spark discussions on all sorts of things, and they're talking with each other cross market where they wouldn't ever have really talked to each other before.
Mm-hmm.
And we noticed that there's these bonds that form between them, and they have this little unit each year that we go through the program to where they just really have like a sense of belonging, and their minds are opened up a little bit more to how other markets do things and how DT thinks. And how we approach problems, and we just share a lot and discuss a lot, and we feel like that really forms a good foundation for them having more of a DT perspective and a frame of mind when they go back um, out into their studio. So I don't think I mentioned that so the embedded part is that these are billable staff. We kind of developed the program to where we weren't hiring any more full-time design technology staff. We just wanted to have people, like I said, boots on the ground that are out in the studios working on projects.
Hmm.
So, um, so yeah, they go back out after training, and they're still working on projects. And because they have that kind of DT mindset, they have better eyes and ears for what's truly going on projects, and they can communicate with us some, needs and gaps, and it's just a really good connection for us at DT because we are 100% overhead, and we aren't working on projects.
What I found is when you make that fork between an architect and a design technology person, or a
Hmm.
artist and a technology, or a tech, you start to go away from projects a little bit. You're not as well, using your term, embedded in the projects.
Hmm.
You're not doing it every day. And although our intentions are good for the design on the design technology side, that hey, this is the way you should do it, it may not necessarily be the best way to do it anymore. There may be a new way of doing it, or there may be a new trick that somebody has learned that comes up to the table or comes onto the table.
Yeah, and I've had that, I feel like we all have that fear as we grow in our careers where you start off doing one thing and you may be
Mm-hmm.
really entrenched in it, and you're the expert. And then as take on more responsibility and you're doing all sorts of other things, you become detached from that. And your first thought is to be fearful that you're detached from it. And really, that's okay. That's the natural progression. You're growing in other areas so that other people can grow in that, expertise of what you were originally in, right? It's all this progression, and um, you don't have to be the expert all the time. Um, and it helps really make those connections with the people that are on the projects directly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I took away from that, because I watched it as well, any chance that I can see Kristina in action, I'm going to take, was the selection process for these individuals. I know that as a BIM manager myself, I've definitely gotten the drift when people do not want a DT role, right? They're like,
Yep.
stay away from design technology. I'm really good at Revit, but I do not want to be a standards person. Right. And so I think that integration into your selection process, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and that just came from making mistakes and picking the wrong people. Like, you, after 8 years of selecting candidates, you start to realize you're investing a lot of time in them, and you're investing a lot of your own time in training those individuals. And when you see that in a small sense, it fails afterwards because that person either didn't retain the information, or they don't really speak up, and so they're not much of a voice in the studios. They kind of just take what they learned and kind of keep it to themselves. You realize, like, that's great, we elevated that one person's skill, but that wasn't really the intent of what we wanted here. We wanted it to be something more. So we learn so much about picking the right candidates for this, and in understanding who we should invest the time in. And some of the things we learned were, of course, like Dana said, the interest level, right? Like, we're not going to force somebody to go through this if that's not their path that they want to go down. And that has definitely occurred several times where it's somebody that we wanted to be a DTSS, and that wasn't their path, and that was totally fine. And of course, nobody gets dinged for that in any way, and we understand. Then there's also timing. So we found that people would generally select their all stars in on their projects. So they're great with Revit. They're taking on more project responsibility, so they're a little bit more independent, and they're just succeeding at everything. And so those people naturally get all the work piled on to them, right? So they would go through boot camp because they're the people like, yes, I can do it, I can do this, I can do that, I can do all the things. And we would train them, and then as soon as they graduated, they would be off to the races on like almost a project management track or taking on more CA responsibility, and we would kind of lose them as a DTSS. So we thought, you can't really take somebody who is also taking on a lot more other responsibilities on their projects. So somebody who's like a little bit more earlier on in their career and really eager to become more familiar with the tools, but also be able to be a peer that has time to help their peers too. And then the traits. So I mentioned somebody who's, you know, like we were talking about introverts and extroverts and everything, and it's unfortunate because with somebody that's an introvert, if you're training them to be able to advocate and speak up and share knowledge with their peers, and if it's somebody who keeps to themselves more, then you're really losing that. And I hate it because we don't want to exclude anyone from the program because of those traits, because those also make someone really strong in other aspects. So that's something more recently that we've been trying to dial in on, is how do we make this inclusive of everyone and find different roles and different meaning for a DTSS who maybe not who's maybe a little bit more reserved. Um, and skills was another one. We in the beginning, it was so hard to just get buy-in for people to send their candidates to boot camp because it was so much time. So we were just happy if anybody would send anyone. And um, and there were times where it was a new hire who doesn't know Revit, and but they're really eager and they seem like they're a quick learner. And we've had some of those candidates where we throw them in to the wolves basically, and you're going from not knowing Revit to talking about like some of the most advanced topics in Revit, and that just didn't work out very well either. Um, Even though some of those people could kind of keep up, they were just constantly overwhelmed, and it's kind of too much for them at first. So there's just so many things to consider with the right candidate.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see someone throwing somebody in right away because they don't know what they should be doing or they're brand new. Let's put them into this program and see what happens.
Yeah, and that was sometimes too also like more towards the like once we had a few years under our belt, then
Uh-huh.
certain markets already had 4 or 5 DTSS. So they're like, well, we only have like one or two other people that would even go through it. So let's just send
Right.
them and see what happens.
Right.
So
Well, we've talked about how you pick them. Let's talk about what they do.
in boot camp or afterwards, because I in the talk I didn't
Both.
really focus too much on the in boot camp, right? Because like the talk was really also for there's a lot of non-technology, non-design technology attendees,
Uh-huh.
and I like to think that this type of program could be anything really. It could be practice in architecture, it could be like design boot camp, it could be anything, right? It's like it's really the curriculum's a curriculum. We can talk about the topics if we want, but it's like your typical design technology topics, Revit, model
Mm-hmm.
management, work sharing, visualization,
Well,
class
you know
discussion,
our
that kind of
audience.
stuff. They probably know what we're covering. So I
Yeah,
don't know how
well,
much we want to go into that, or
I
you
think
tell me.
more, maybe not how they're covering it. I'm
Okay.
sorry, not what you're covering, but how you're doing it.
How we're
I
doing it.
I think that is what's interesting to me.
So also for knowledge architecture, they had a book club recently, and we read this book called Think Again by
Uh-huh.
Adam Grant. And it's all about rethinking how you do things. And when I think about how we're delivering this training, I would say this is the number one thing I've rethought over and over and over again and changed every year for boot camp. And it's all about, like that psychology of learning and retention.
Mhm.
And again, because you're spending all this time together, you're going over all this training, and if it's not retained, then that's a problem. And when we first started boot camp, we thought let's just do all of it. Let's train on all of Navisworks, all of Revit, all of every program that we even touch,
Mhm.
even programs we don't know if we want to implement yet. We're going to see what they think, and we're going to just go over all this training. And that was part of the 200 hours of let's just like get really into DT right now.
Right. That's a lot of billable hours that are not
Yeah.
billed.
Yes. And while I do think there was a lot of benefit out of that, we explored and stretched our brains a lot more than we might now in boot camp, but the retention really was hard, and um, we wanted to narrow it down a little bit more. So we took some of the topics out and focused on what really mattered. And another thing we did was the focus on hands-on training. So
Mm.
how many times have all of you delivered training and you're just kind of walking people through the program and through the steps, and they follow with you, they're getting it, and then that's all fine, but then it's not retained, right? And you wonder where's that gap? what how do you really get training to stick with people? And I mean, I thought the same thing for Dynamo. I felt like when I was learning Dynamo, the tables were turned because I was now just like following people creating graphs in Dynamo, and it was all making sense at the time. But then when I was left to my own devices, I just stared at a blank screen and didn't know what
That's
to do,
totally how
right?
I feel with Python.
Yeah.
100%.
And so it would keep me up at night, and like, how do you train better? How do you train software for people to really retain? And I don't know I don't think I have it down at all still, but I did notice that the less I talk and the less I point to my screen and have them follow, the better. And at first, it kind of felt like I'm not really doing much. It's like these classes actually became a lot easier for me. I'm not talking for 6 hours out of the day. I'm not like getting bored of my own voice. I'm not saying these same instructions I've said, thousands of times by now. And I feel like it's helping with retention more, where we kind of give them an overview of the gist of what we're trying to do, and then we've created handout exercises for every topic that we do, so that after the overview they go through on their own, like solo work time for those topics. And so because they have to work through it on their own, and they're reading at their own pace, and they're
Mm.
answering questions on the worksheet, it just seems like it's been working better.
One that you mentioned, the book that you have a book club. What was the book's name that you mentioned? The rework book.
Think Again.
And that was one of the think again. I'm definitely going to write that down. We'll put that in the show comments,
Okay.
because that was one of the things that I took away from the course that you were talking about in the presentation. Was you not only have a book, I think in the presentation you mentioned the habits of successful people that you guys read. but also that you play Chutes and Ladders, that somebody designed Chutes and Ladders in Revit.
Yes.
So like these types of like team building exercises, I think are so cool that you integrate as part of the Revit course. It's not just about design technology, right?
Right. Yeah, and that was another like tactic. These all came from rethinking how to get people to remember stuff. And when I had also learned somewhere like having different touch points of talking about those topics, like when you have multiple touch points, that's going to help with retention too. So not only do you cover the topic and they do their exercise, but then at the end of the week, if you bring up a question about something you said on Monday, they really have to pull deep into their brains and remember something, right? So you bring it up again, then you play a game or you do a quiz and you're repeating the concepts multiple times. And I hope it's helping, but at the same time, we're not like measuring retention. So I'm not really sure, but it feels better.
No, that's awesome. And I think that even you mentioned within, I think it was the Q&A portion about how it's not, you have multiple disciplines at the front of your eyes. Ianakis, I don't want to mispronounce it.
Yeah.
Ianakis.
Mhm.
And so it's not necessarily, it's discipline agnostic, right? You're not teaching to one discipline either.
Correct. Yeah. And that's what we like about it too, because when we discuss best practices and how one person does things one way, it's awesome to have people from different disciplines and different markets in there because we just have really great conversations. And yeah, we don't sometimes the topics are geared towards one of the disciplines, but it actually helps the others be more well-rounded and understand the bigger picture better. It might not be super relevant to them, but it still helps them too.
Right, like you said, you actually have breakout sessions where the individuals will kind of teach from their perspective, kind of things that they've learned, which is super awesome, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
also kind of gives people the opportunity to shine. Like you're saying, it's not you just kind of teaching to a class for 3 days or for however long the
Yeah.
breakout session is, right? Like
Yeah.
it's more focused on their actual problems, and I think that's when people retain stuff, right?
Yep. And we kind of carried that into after boot camp too. So all of the DTSS will deliver a little mini training throughout the year. We call DT time, like tea time, like tea and crumpets, but DT time. And they are the ones instructing and doing those live recordings for everyone. So I feel like just the variety of people, like there's like 25 of us teaching different topics throughout the year, and it's nice to have the variety.
Yeah, it is nice to have the variety.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have someone teach a class that isn't from the technology side
Mm-hmm.
because they can relate to all of the stuff like why you do things and so on and so forth on the technology side, and then they can also relate to the design side of, oh man, I don't want to have to do that.
Yeah.
That's such a pain in the butt, and then they can say why.
Yep. And don't you always remember something more when you teach it to someone else?
Yes.
When you want to learn, teach, right? That's what they say. But I also find that a common theme that we've found even here on BIM Thoughts is that when people want to learn some sort of, computational workflow or get into Dynamo or Grasshopper, it's because of the problem they have, like Dynamo won't do it. So let me learn Python, type of mentality. Very, very common.
Yeah.
So that in essence will not only allow people to engage more, but want them to further their knowledge of this platform in terms of pushing the limits.
Mm-hmm.
You've already obviously selected people who want to do that.
Yeah.
Right? So like, you have all your bases covered there, which is really cool. So what are some other kind of lessons learned that, through the evolution of this, you said 9 years that you've been doing this?
I mean, that was a big one. Well, so those were two big ones, right? Like selecting the right candidate and then rethinking teaching methods. And it's funny because when we read this book about rethinking, it actually made me feel a lot better because I feel like I'm changing my mind all the time. If something's not quite working, I switch it up and I try different things. And I sometimes I feel like, are people thinking I'm like a what's a like a flip flopper, or I'm just like constant. I said this thing last year and now I'm saying this other thing and this is going to be better. And it used to be, I was really advocating for 200 hours of training. Now I'm advocating for only 60 hours. And I just like doubted myself a lot. And how in this book made me feel really great because it said that rethinking is a good thing because you're questioning constantly if it's the right thing. So I think that's one takeaway from both this book and from the DTSS program is that it's okay to be wrong about something. It's okay to keep shaping it and rethinking it all the time. You're really just trying to get to something that works. And if you think it's not working, that's okay. Just try to think of another way and try it and try another thing.
I was just going to say that that's a good point about the rethinking and sort of changing it up, because that also keeps you engaged and keeps you thinking, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to delivering the same curriculum, over 9 years. We
Mm-hmm.
used to have a gentleman here that in the industry, and he was really big into jousting in medieval. He actually held jousting clinics and the whole deal. And so when he taught Revit, he would have them design an actual medieval castle, moats, the whole 9 yards. And people remember. You remember if you went to work that day and learned Revit by designing a castle.
Yeah.
Um, and the passion that he would have for it, because he's teaching something he likes to do in regards to something he likes to do, it sort of brings it all together. So then you have that as the instructor, you have that passion, you have that excitement, and you're projecting that onto what you're doing. So that just gets people excited. It gets them involved. It gets them as part of that. So you kind of see that two-way street where you're changing things up, so you're keeping engaged. And if you're delivering the material in a way that excites you, you're just going to naturally excite the people that are learning.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a good point.
The other thing that I took from what you've been saying is we talked about the struggle to learn Dynamo, and some people they get it, some people don't. Left brain, right brain. And one of the things that I used to do when I was back in my days of teaching at the consultant was we moved away from a typical training like we would do is say for Revit, where we had a book, we had exercises. This is the topic, this is the demonstration, this is the exercise. And for something like Revit, that's a pretty good workflow. But Dynamo was different. You had to sort of think outside the box. You had to think a little bit differently. So what we would start to do is we would do a one day where we would talk about the basics of visual programming. We give people lots of examples and let them sort of get their fingers dirty, their hands dirty in the process. But the second day would be a workshop. And what that would mean was that there was no instructing, there was no curriculum, but they were instructed before the training started to think up of a problem in their everyday life that they use at the firm that they would like to solve using a tool like Dynamo. And then they would spend the day coming up with a tool or a process or a simple graph, and then they would present it almost like a mini hackathon type of thing. But again, it led to more engagement. It led to them thinking about a problem that they have to solve. And I find that if you're dealing with something that you have to solve, again, you're entrenched in it. You're really thinking about it, and it sort of fires off the old synapses, word of the day, to get you up and get you going. So I think that's another way to sort of think outside the box, like you say, changing things up to get people involved.
So was each student then doing their own Dynamo graph or their own program, or did you like vote on one and say, yeah, let's do that one?
No, it was usually, depending on the size of the class, usually it would be in groups. So two people that came from the structure department would say, we have this problem with putting rebar in, so we want to find a way in that. Sometimes it was individuals, sometimes it was groups, but it changed for every class. So we didn't say, hey, everyone, make a graph that did this. You were doing whatever worked for you. And then me, and if there was a big class, we'd have multiple people walking around helping them, giving them answers, and then they would be bouncing ideas off each other. Again,
Right.
not really a hackathon, but that type of mentality. We really got great results off of it.
Yeah, I can see that working. I can see also doing that and then stopping everybody and say, hey, this is what we just ran into over here. Let's show you how we did this real quick.
Very good point. Yes, that then everybody's learning from everything. That's the one thing that you have to
Mhm.
sort of keep a rein on when you just let people do their own, is that little Bobby's not over in the corner looking on Facebook and not doing anything all day. You
Right.
do have to make sure that as there's lesson learns or troubles run into, that it is shared. So that's a very good point, Bill.
hmm
So I've been kind of curious about different structures of full-time versus part-time versus billable overhead, how many people per production person for design technology or digital practice in general. And like with our structure, so we started out with 4 of us in design technology, but now we really only have 2 that are in this specific role.
Hmm.
And we've got all these DTSS, but they're all, as you know, billable on project, and that's their primary purpose. So sometimes it's hard to get their time. It said we have a very small percentage of all of these 20 plus DTSS, all their time. And, like when we talk with other firms and they've got, for per person, they might have like 3 or 4 times the amount of full-time design technology staff than we have, and you really wonder like what is the sweet spot, and how does everybody get stuff done, and like what's the right ratio of design technology staff to production staff, or to the headcount on the whole firm, because we're of course working with leadership and we're working with marketing and we're looking at new technologies. And I'm curious at your, like how is it set up for at your firm or either other firms that you know? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it has to do with your user base. If you have a user base that is very new to a program, you're going to need more service desk people to help them through it and more training people to help them through it. If your user base is very experienced in Revit, then you really don't have to have as much level 1 help desk. You're going to need to have a lot more level 2 and level 3 stuff where people know what they're doing, and having the people out in the boots on the ground kind of a person is I think a good solution for that, because they're there in their office. They can go over and talk to them about a particular problem they're running into and how to get something done, and they can quickly show them how to do that because they're right there and they know what project they're working on as well. So I guess it all boils down to your user base. If
Yeah.
your user base is experienced, you can get by with less people, but it's going to cost the same amount of money to have that department because the less people costs more because each person knows more, so thus they're more valuable.
That's true, because so when we started it, right, it was to help with our Revit adoption, but now
Right.
8, 9 years later, they are our boots on the ground, but we use them more for discussions and best practices
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And they definitely still provide a lot of support, but it's not like we need a lot of day-to-day support and training for people because of our user base. But
Right.
so then, Dana, I'm curious from your perspective. So you mentioned earlier before we started recording that you're now like a computational lead, and like how did that come to shape, and what does the rest of the design technology structure look like at your firm?
That's a very good question. And it's probably one that is evolving, especially with the last year of havoc that has happened for most of us in the way that we work. But we have a chief technology officer, Derek White. He's really awesome, Smith Group. And he essentially is, the head of our design technology practice, or technology and practice is what we call it at Smith Group. And under there's 4 or 5 or 6 groups, depending on how you look at it. There's digital delivery, which is really the delivery of all digital goods. computation, which has its own kind of branch, which is kind of looked at into 3 different groups in itself: analytics, geometry, and more efficiency scripts for, construction documentation, more Revit efficiency, if you will. So kind of that divide between what we do in the design side with, solar analysis and lighting analysis, all different things like that. Geometry and building forms, and then later what we do with, construction documentation and data there. So I'm the leader of the latter part there, the efficiency portion, but also a member of the digital delivery group. So I kind of share roles there a little bit, which is a little bit strange. And then on, the side of that, outside of that, we have visualization, data, as well as a development group of our own, which kind of maintains, a bunch of add-ins and apps and different things to make us work much more efficiently within Smith Group. They take advantage of the Forge platforms and, all of those types of things. So I love working at Smith Group in that they definitely do take a big stand in technology and want to be innovators in all different types of facets of design technology. And I would say that those kind of lines are very blurry, if you will. We all work together within the technology and practice groups.
So, Carl, I'm going to let you have the final thought, unless Dana has something. Maybe we should do it as final round.
Well, in that case, my final thought is that this has been enlightening.
Yes.
I think if people spent more time, or I guess firms, looking at what they can do to help educate all of their people within, and maybe did a little more of growing within, that would be great. I know that a lot of times in the AEC industry, we tend to look outside for the next great thing. And what Kristina's talking about here in the boot camp and training within, I think is an awesome initiative.
I like that term, training within.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty cool term.
Yeah, you can make it really relevant to your own projects that way.
My final thought would be that even looking at the book here, the title, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know, right? That's like so inspirational in itself. I'm definitely going to buy this book and read it and follow up on the comments of this particular podcast with my thoughts on it. But that I think is the summation of what I would want to take from this, is that, rework and thinking about what you're doing, putting conscious thought into the process, and don't just keep doing what you've always been doing just because it's always worked. And I think that's really the beauty about design technology in itself, right? We migrated from hand drawing to 2D CAD to BIM to, computational thought and, all of these different types of advancements in visualizations and AR, VR, and all of this really cool stuff. And so I think that's really what we need to do as design technology leaders, is continue to think again. Think about how we can rework it. Think about how people learn, right? We all don't learn the same way. Not all the same people. We don't do all the same things. So that's my final thought.
That's great. I have one. We came up with a training term called Let's Learn Together, where because the challenge we had with creating training is the same challenge you're having, Kristina, is you don't have time to create these great training classes and create all of the documentation and create all of the stuff. So we came up with the term Let's Learn Together, which means that, hey, I have learned something that's pretty cool. I want to share it with a larger group. And in sharing it with a larger group, I'm going to learn it better, and you're going to learn it too. And if we run into something I don't know, that's okay, because I'm still learning as well. And that has turned out to be a pretty good program for us, because we could get small little tasks, like how to create sets in Bluebeam, for example. That's a Let's Learn Together session. And we can do that pretty quick, and we can just do it as a as a video learning and have a few people ask some questions while we're doing the recording the video. But yes, thank you so much, Kristina.
Yeah, I do like that too. I feel like informal is awesome, right? No one needs to prep a bunch for it, and people still learn a lot. And I second Dana's final thought on just the rethinking. That's kind of my theme for this week is rethinking and constantly improving what you're doing.
Yes, I agree. We should all rethink every now and then.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
If we go way back in BIM thoughts, you could rethink where you store your floor slabs, not in your pocket, right, Bill?
Right. Don't put them in your pocket.
If that's not an ending note, I don't know what is.
That's our final. That's great. Put your floor slab in your pocket. Thank you so much, Kristina.
Thank you, everyone.
We need to have you back on more and more.
Sure. Sounds good.
All right. Goodbye.